this way. Okay. Well, hello everyone, and I'm so glad to be here at European Humanities University. Well, it's so strange at the same time. It is so strange to be here, coming from a different conference. Well, really, 25 years ago, when Almira and I started that Center for Gender Studies, we lived really in a very, very different world, and the way we imagine the future is not the way the future has realized itself. So, but here we are anyway. And well, I'm really glad to be speaking at the conference on gender and immaterial labor, because, as the rector has just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, this is one of those really formative issues of our time. Now, I will be trying to do something about the PowerPoint, but I'm a little bit scared of it. I do not understand how this works. Okay, so. Speaking about, and the title that I gave to my speech is Gender and Immaterial Labor in the Age of AI. And the title of this, can I have a watch please, just to keep track of time? And the title of this conference and the title of my presentation is like a microchip. Looking tiny, a microchip has decades, even centuries of science and well, it has a life of its own. Decades of, and even centuries of science and engineering built into it. In a similar way, conceptualizing immaterial labor builds off several concepts. Labor and work, which I'm going to treat as one, just for brevity, and their versions: material labor, immaterial, productive, subsistence, bullshit, precarious, etc. And of course, there's the concept of gender that adds another dimension to make it all stereoscopic. So, well, I'm going to address some of these concepts in succession, but I want to begin with a simple question. Why work? Really, why do we work? The answer that most people give is that they work to engage, to earn a living, to meet their basic needs. It seems to follow naturally that work is regarded by many as toil, as means to an end, as an unpleasant activity which we would avoid if we could. And this take on labor has been abundant in world literature, like in this poem that I'm going to quote now briefly. It's called the Song of the Shirt, Песня рубашки by Thomas Hood. He wrote in the 19th century, with fingers weary and worn, with eyelids heavy and red, a woman sat in unwomanly rags, plying her needle and thread, stitch, 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 work, 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 till the brain begins to swim, walk, 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 till the eyes are heavy and dim. And in an excellent translation by Эдуард Багрицкий, от песен от скользкого пота в глазах растекается мгла, работай, 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 пчелой заполняющей соты, покуда из пальцев с налета не выпрыгнет рыбкая игла. Работай, 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 погода светла, покуда стежками без счета играет летая игла, работай, 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 покуда не умерла. Work is tedious and unpleasant and sometimes deadly. These views are widely held, so there must be some truth in them. So many people cannot be entirely wrong. However, when one looks deeper, it becomes clear that attitudes to work are more complex and contradictory. They concern the role that work can play, it can potentially play, and then ought to play. Must work necessarily be experienced as unwanted toil and regarded as a mere means to an end? Labor has been a trope in thinking about life that we call philosophy since its early days. The most familiar and widely held theory in philosophy as an everyday life is an instrumental view of work, which is unpleasant and means to an end. Plato and Aristotle regarded a fully human life as the life of reason. This requires exemption from physical labor, which they look upon as a lower activity catering only to lower needs. For Immanuel Kant as well, we are rational beings and our physical nature is a lower and merely animal aspect of our being. Such attitudes are also evident in an important strand of Christian thought, which treats work as a curse, a punishment for our fallen nature. Work is regarded as foreign activity forced upon us. This instrumental view of work is expressed with particular clarity in the philosophy of hedonism that underlies classical economics. And John Locke was very succinct. For example, work for its own sake, he says, is against nature, that is, against human nature. But then came Karl Marx and provided a more illuminating alternative. Marx's view is that work can potentially be fulfilling activity. As human beings, he contends, we are not only creatures of need and desire, or passive consumers who would ideally like our needs to be met with, as Hume puts it, no laborious occupation required. Rather, we are active, productive, and creative beings. We get satisfaction from actively exercising our powers, from overcoming obstacles and being productive. Humans are active and creative beings and not just creatures of need. This view touches on another important philosophical tradition, running from Plato to Kant, which sees human beings in this way. However, these philosophers tend to see our productivity and creativity as occurring primarily in the realm of reason. Marx, by contrast, stresses our productivity and creativity as operating in the material sphere, where essentially materially productive beings. Concrete material creative activity is what Marx calls our species activity, by which he means our distinctively human powers and potentials. He also describes productive activity as man's spiritual essence, his human essence. Unfortunately, Marx did not explain this in any detail, what he meant by these phrases. So we have to speculate, there's no other way. Work is one of the ways through which we overcome our division from nature and reestablish our unity with it by shaping and forming the object we transform ourselves and our natural environment. So we have this division into material and immaterial labor. But the Marxist tradition and traditions on the left and many other traditions pertain. We are under capitalism, and most of the work that most people do most of the time is unwanted and unpleasant, and quite often people see no practical point in it. So much so, I forgot completely about the PowerPoint. So much so that an anthropologist, David Graeber, came up with the concept of bullshit jobs. These are, and this is a term, as we know now, these are meaningless jobs that bring societal harm. He began with his 2013 essay on the phenomenon of bullshit jobs, and then in 2018, a book came out which argued the pointlessness of many contemporary jobs, particularly those in the field of finance, law, human resources, public relations, and consultancy. Huge masses of people in Europe and North America in particular spend their entire working lives performing tasks that secretly believe they do not really need to be performed. There is no meaning to them. This bullshit jobs is a metaphor or a name for a form of paid employment that is so completely pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious that even the employee cannot justify its existence, although they usually do not say this openly. And Graeber suggested a classification of these jobs They are those that serve to make their superiors feel important, like receptionists, administrative assistants, door attendants, and those that act to harm or deceive others on behalf of their employer lobbyists, corporate lawyers, telemarketers, public relations specialists, or those that temporarily fix problems that could be fixed permanently, like programmers repairing shoddy code, airline desk staff who can calm passengers whose bags do not arrive, and those that create the appearance of something useful is being done when it is not. For example, survey administrators, in-house magazine journalists, corporate compliance officers, and those who create extra work for those who do not need it. For example, middle management, leadership professionals, and so on. Well, I cannot say that I agree completely with Graeber's classification, but it has become important. So Graeber holds that work as a source of virtue is a recent idea. For work or labor was disdained by the aristocracy in classical times, but it was inverted as virtues through then radical philosophers like John Locke. The Puritan idea of virtue through suffering justified the toil of the working classes as noble. And so bullshit jobs justify contemporary patterns of living. That the pains of dull work are suitable justification for the ability to fulfill consumer desires, and that fulfilling those desires is indeed the reward for suffering through pointless work. Accordingly, over time, the prosperity extracted from technological advances has been reinvested into industry and consumer growth for its own sake, rather than the purchase of additional benefit of leisure time from work. In short, bullshit jobs are the product of capitalism, especially the development of the financial and administrative sector. And as we live in this post-Fordist moment, post-Fordist economy, there's one more change in the nature of work. All this led to the massive existence of precarious jobs. And this is another term. Precarious work is a term that stands for non-standard, unstable, or temporary employment that has become ubiquitous. It may be poorly paid, but not necessarily. Mostly it is insecure, unprotected, and unable to support a household. And we mostly know about this from this famous book by the British sociologist Henry Standing, and his idea of the precariat class. The precariat is a social class, and the title of his book is The Precariat, the New Dangerous Class. And the precariat is a social class formed by people suffering from precarity, which means existing without predictability or security, affecting material or psychological welfare. And what is included into precarious jobs? Part-time jobs, self-employment, fixed-time work, temporary work, on-call work, and remote workers. And who physically are in this class? Of course, this can be, for example, agricultural migrant workers, but also highly educated professionals employed in all kinds of temporary projects would also be in the precariat class. So all these developments are a product of globalization and a shift from manufacturing economy, not to say that manufacturing economy was without any problems, and a shift from manufacturing economy to service and information economy, and the spread of information technology, a new economy which demands flexibility in the workplace. And I'm going to return to this in a moment, but at this moment, I need to introduce the concept of gender. Introducing the concept of gender, of course, this is about the division of labor. Now, the division of labor is a precondition of social order, not a particular social order, but social order as such. The first division of labor in history has been the one between women and men. And according to Engels, and this work, of course, it is dated, but it is pretty pretty brilliant. According to Engels, who was one of the first to theorize the division, men and women performed to an extent different tasks. Men hunting and women gathering. Of course, this division is very conditional. Women could participate in hunting, and men used to spend quite some time in gathering, but mostly women had to stay put because when pregnant and breastfeeding, and which they were for most of their lives in those days. So this division into men's and women work did not matter much. But then again comes, at least Engels tells us, but this division becomes really important when private property is invented. And the division of labor into men's and women's turned out to be the division into productive and subsistence work, which is about the reproduction of life. Productive work, as we know from Marx and Engels and this tradition, productive labor has exchange value. Its results can be exchanged or sold. And subsistence work cannot be exchanged. This kind of labor is necessary for the reproduction of life, but it cannot be alienated from the producer. And in market economy, as Engels explains, when a product is not sold, it does not exist. So it turns all these women's work, subsistence work, into something which is invisible to the market. Thus, productive labor can be accumulated and become a source of wealth, while the subsistence work is mostly the labor of love. It is done for free. And feminists have long been interested in this kind of immaterial and effective labor, if the terms themselves are a more recent invention. Their early explorations of immaterial labor in practices and relations were part of the struggle to expand the category of labor to include more of its gendered norms. Effective labor, in particular, has been understood within certain feminist traditions as fundamental both to contemporary models of exploitation and to the possibility of their subversion. And some groundbreaking work in this field was done by Ali Hochschild. I never know how to pronounce her name correctly, who published her famous The Managed Heart in 1983. And she comes up with theorizing the emotional work of pink-collar occupations, of which the flight attendant serves as an iconic example. And she acknowledged the specific skills required for emotional labor. The salesperson or a flight attendant, for example, engages in a distinctive kind of labor. Indeed, emotional work is not just a form of labor, but an example of social necessary labor. This work requires not just the use, but the production of subjectivity. Thus, for example, when the emotional display of the worker is part of what is being sold in service work, seeming to love the job becomes part of the job. What is more, actually trying to love it and to enjoy the customers helps the worker in this effort. So it is the production of subjectivity, but also the production of gender. Personalities are gendered, and this is part of their labor to the employers. And modern technology has been able to introduce, or rather the economy benefited from modern technology, and some other kinds of immaterial labor came into being. And at this point, I just wanted to say a few words about aspirational, something which can be called aspirational labor. And this is something that is there in culture industries, which are driven by the romance of being creative. And speaking about culture industries, I would name, for example, communications, transnational media, curatorial industries, culture, all kinds of culture industries. If one looks at students in these industries, They are disproportionately female and child-free, very dedicated and exceptionally hardworking. They fly on the euphoria of imagined success. I would also add people who are employed, although it is sometimes this is not seen as a form of employment, but it is. People who do social justice work, people who are in human rights, ecological, feminist, LGBT+, and other organizations. Many people in these industries, they consider self-employment, which again is precarious, or they try to set up small creative businesses. And these young people, mostly the women, they envision mobility. And here being geographically mobile is important. One has to be able to go where opportunities are. Work becomes akin to a romantic relationship. And feminism is important, gender analysis is important as it analyzes the gender inequalities of these precarious career paths. Well, where am I? Yeah. So, and as modern technology enhanced our abilities to do this kind of immaterial work, we need to be able to conceptualize this new trend as well. It seems that digital technologies, new technologies, they enhance human powers and possibilities and human achievements. But it is difficult to be able to recognize them as such, to affirm them as our powers and achievements, and to find realization in and through them. For the most part, we cannot do so. To describe our situation, the situation in which Karl Marx lived. He used the graphic image of a genie, which we ourselves have summoned up, but which by some weird spell has now become an alien and hostile force out of control. I want to mention a recent letter by I think several hundred developers who were at the birthplace of artificial intelligence, and who wanted to warn all of us about the threat that information technologies are becoming these days, and they're writing that they probably can be a danger to humanity. So, but it was Karl Marx almost 200 years ago, 150 years ago, who warned us that technologies have powers that threaten to consume and destroy us, and indeed to poison and destroy the whole planet. In the year 1930, John Keynes, a famous economist, predicted that by century's end, technology would have advanced sufficiently and advanced nations would have achieved a 15-hour work week. There's every reason to believe he was right. In technological terms, we are quite capable of this, but this did not happen. Instead, technology has been marshaled, if anything, to figure out ways, has been marshaled, if anything, to figure out ways to make us work more. And I want to mention one more aspect. New technologies even change our lives and identities. There is a contradiction at the heart of digital media. We use commercial platforms to express our identity, to build community, and to engage politically. At the same time, our status updates, tweets, videos, photographs, and music files are free content for these sites. We are also generating an almost endless supply of user data that can be mined, repurposed, and sold to advertisers. As users in the commercial web, we're socially and creatively engaged, but also labeled by the companies that provide our communicative platforms. And of course, this is also gender. This is gender is performed as difference because, well, while in the market economy the work is ideally neutral, in reality people are gendered and turn to have their gendered roles and responsibilities and need to sustain social reproduction. Gender, which is the anchoring of a certain group of individuals in the specific sphere of social activities, gets reproduced as the segregation into more or less efficient workers takes place. Quite often it is the segregation into women and men. As some labor experts point out, new employment patterns in the digital era, are precarious patterns with gendered implications. Neoliberal economy and market economy emphasizes one's autonomy and responsibility for one's own well-being. And thus, contradiction emerges between women's participation in production and reproduction remains and becomes newly meaningful. With flexible labor markets, with austerity, with precarious employment, workers have to efficiently market themselves and be available at any moment 24/7 to make themselves interesting and successfully market their lives. And hence the importance of social media. They need to constantly update their CVs in order to have any chance on this job market, for example, in culture industries or in other industries. All this militates against the idea of having children, of having a family, since maternity means having a more fixed abode. Reproductive labor has become simultaneously more important and harder to find time and space to do. And public support for it is reduced as families stay abandoned to their own devices. And I understand that what I'm saying is very much a reality in the United States where I live now. It must be a little bit different in the European Union, but still. Reproduction has a social cost. It becomes the burden for those whose cost it is assigned to, regardless of whether they can or will have children. In this sense, gender is constantly reimposed and renaturalized. And this becomes a kind of a crisis of identity for a generation of young women who sought gender equality through acquiring what once used to be risk-proof qualifications linked with degrees and graduate training. And here comes ChatGPT that created a new wave of apprehensions and concern. We are living in this new wave of the information revolution. And definitely this is going to change our working lives. At this point, for example, with ChatGPT, which came into active use just, well, probably during the several months, probably this spring semester, I noticed that my students began to write so much better, and I was so happy for them. And then I realized, well, this is good. This is what is going on. And in the next semester, I just don't know how I'm going to grade my students or what kind of tests, what kind of work I need to come up with. I just really don't know. So we live in this mix of these new developments, information revolution and reproduction, and something really going on with reproduction. Really, I was reading an article in The Economist recently, which argued that for the first time since the Black Death in the 15th century Europe, world population is going to decrease. And for example, the birth rate, fertility rate in Singapore is 1 birth per woman. And I was reading this and thinking, how horribly. And then I realized that I also have only 1 child. So this is not just in Singapore, this is here as well. So we need to take all this into account. thinking about information technologies and new technologies and digital media and material and immaterial labor. So technologies which are a great new thing in our lives. And all this need not and should not be the way in which, the way it is now, in which we relate to our own products and powers, Karl Marx argued. This way is neither necessary nor inevitable that they should be experienced in this way. On the contrary, that it should appear to be so is itself a symptom of alienation or an indictment of contemporary society. Marx sees that the problems are much more deeply rooted in the present order. They are intrinsic, well, Karl Marx was writing at the time of capitalism, they are intrinsic to the capitalist system itself, to the neoliberal system itself, I would say today. A revolutionary social transformation is needed before our present alienation can be overcome and before we can begin to be at home with our own powers and creations, of which digital technologies are a part. Only then will we finally be able to recognize that the genie of our technology and industry is in fact an emanation of ourselves, of our own powers and selves in alienated form. And only then will we be in a position to begin to take conscious social control of these powers and use them in a free and conscious way for our own real benefit. Thank you.